The 1970s gave us disco, lava lamps, and some of the most hideous cars ever to roll off an assembly line. Buckle up. Today we're taking a joyride through 18 of the ugliest automotive crimes of the decade. From design disasters to rolling punchlines, these are the cars that made you wonder, who signed off on that? Datsun 200SX. Not every fall from grace makes a sound, but this one thudded. At a time when Datsun seemed untouchable, with the 240Z charming sports car fans and the 510 winning over pragmatists, they released the 200SX, a car that looked like it was designed by someone halfway through fixing a toaster. The grille, shaped like a bargain bin electric shaver, set the tone, and things didn't improve from there. Its slab-sided bodywork and lifeless lines felt less like a design choice and more like a default setting. Sure, it had rear-wheel drive and a 2.0-liter engine on paper, but so does a forklift. Calling it sporty was generous to a fault. It lumbered, it groaned, and it drank gas like it was trying to forget the 70s ever happened. Visibility? Not great, but with so few buyers, complaints were a statistical impossibility. And while most cars aged poorly in this era, the 200SX disintegrated with a certain poetic urgency. It didn't just rust, it flaked away like shame in the rain. In a decade packed with daring flops and design swings, the 200SX managed to stand out by doing nothing bold at all, and somehow still doing it badly. A forgettable car that reminds you, sometimes mediocrity is the loudest kind of ugly. Leata Cabalero. The Chevy Chevette was never anyone's dream car. It wheezed, rattled, and accelerated like it had second thoughts. But for all its flaws, at least it wasn't trying to win any beauty contests. That is, until Donald E. Steinbach from Port Falls decided it needed a glow-up. Armed with a drum of Bondo, an ocean of fiberglass, and questionable taste, he transformed the humble Chevette into the Caballero, a name he claimed was for his wife, though it sounds more like a typo in a telenovela script. His vision: combine the body lines of a first-gen Monte Carlo with the proportions of a toaster oven. The result? A rolling contradiction. Long in the nose, short in sense. And somehow, this wasn't a one-off. Steinbach actually managed to crank out nearly 100 of these Frankensteins, including a few El Camino-style pickups that looked like they'd lost a bet with common sense. He priced them at nearly double what a stock Chevette cost, which might explain why the project ended in financial disaster. Then again, naming your automotive side hustle after your spouse and gluing on a fake muscle car front end. Some losses are harder to measure in dollars. Bricklin SV-1. Some people leave their mark on the automotive world. Malcolm Bricklin left a dent. After introducing the American public to the Subaru 360 and later the Yugo, two cars that made used skateboards look like luxury transport, you'd think he'd call it a day. Instead, he gave us the Bricklin SV-1, a plastic-clad, gull-wing-doored curiosity that was marketed as a safety sports car. It turned out to be about as safe and sporty as a folding chair in a hurricane. The design tried to be bold, but landed somewhere between concept car and kid's toy left out in the sun. It featured exaggerated bumpers that looked vacuum-formed by a cartoonist, tiny slit-like windows that gave off spy movie prop energy, and turbine-style wheels straight out of a 1970s Van Mural fantasy. Functionally, the SV-1 was a mess. Panels warped before they even made it to the chassis. Gull-wing doors weighed a solid 90 pounds and occasionally refused to open, leaving unlucky owners trapped inside their own plastic panic rooms. And don't even ask about the electrical system, unless you're near a fire extinguisher. The SV-1 had one consistent quality: disappointment. It was hard to look at, harder to drive, and nearly impossible to take seriously. Buick Riviera. How do you take one of the best-looking American coupes of the late 60s and turn it into something that looks like it's melting in the sun? That's the riddle Buick answered, unintentionally, in 1970, with the second-generation Riviera. From 1966 to 1969, the Riviera had real presence, taut lines, hidden headlights, and a muscular stance that exuded quiet confidence. Then came the redesign. And suddenly, it looked like it had aged 40 years overnight. The grille appeared to be slowly sliding off the front end, as if gravity had declared war on it. The rear wheel arches were smothered under odd-looking fender skirts that grew over the tires like creeping ivy. The proportions turned doughy and waterlogged, giving the whole car a sluggish, marshy vibe. Less street cruiser, more landlocked houseboat. Naturally, customers noticed. Riviera sales, which had been climbing steadily, fell off a cliff when this swollen, confused-looking version landed in showrooms. The public's verdict was clear. Beauty might be skin-deep, but ugly cuts straight to the bottom line. Thankfully, Buick rebounded quickly. By 1971, the Riviera had reinvented itself again, this time with the polarizing but unforgettable boat tail design. Love it or not, at least it stopped looking like it was melting. Ford Thunderbird. What happens when a car company forgets that subtlety can be a good thing? You get the 1970 Ford Thunderbird, a vehicle that went from smooth and sophisticated to looking like it lost a fight with a pelican. The late 60s T-Birds weren't showstoppers, but they had a certain low-key charm. They didn't try too hard. They didn't need to. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Ford designers slapped a giant chrome beak on the front end, as if the car had aspirations of becoming a bird of prey, or at least cosplaying one. The nose jutted out with such theatrical drama, it practically demanded its own zip code. Suddenly, the once dignified T-Bird had the awkward energy of a dinner guest who talks too loud and doesn't know when to leave. The real irony? Thunderbird was meant to evoke power, elegance, even mystique. What we got in 1970 looked more like a rolling cartoon, heavy up front, disconnected in the rear, and confused all the way through. Sales held steady for a bit, but the styling misstep was a sign of things to come. The T-Bird never quite found its footing again, proving that sometimes bold just turns into bizarre. Do any of these cars make you nostalgic, even if they're not exactly pretty? Share your story. AMC Pacer. Few cars from the 1970s tried harder to be different than the AMC Pacer, and few ended up looking quite so unintentionally hilarious. At first glance, it resembles something you'd expect to see in an animated movie, not parked in a real driveway. With its oversized glass bubble and pudgy, compact body, the Pacer looked less like a car and more like a science experiment that escaped the lab. AMC pitched it as the first wide small car, hoping to stand out in a growing field of imports. And stand out it did, like a goldfish tank on wheels. The panoramic glass was meant to offer improved visibility, but it mostly offered heatstroke. Inside, summer felt like sitting in a greenhouse with wheels. By 1978, the design team doubled down on the awkwardness by shoehorning in an optional V8. This required a taller, bulkier hood and upright grille, giving the car a strange, puffed-up look, as if it had eaten a second lunch and hadn't quite digested it. Efficiency, unsurprisingly, wasn't its strength. Still, the Pacer carved out a weird little cult following. It was a car for misfits, well before misfits were cool, and long before anyone knew what a quirky classic really meant. Volvo 262C. Every now and then, a car gets built, not because the world needs it, but because someone got a little too inspired during an overseas visit. That's more or less how the Volvo 262C came to be. Legend has it that when Henry Ford II showed up in Sweden with a fleet of Lincoln Continental Mark IVs, local execs were so dazzled by the square-jawed luxury coupes that they decided, we should make one, our way. The result? A strangely squat two-door Volvo with all the grace of a brick in a tuxedo. Volvo took its respectable 262 GL Coupe, shipped it to Bertone in Italy, and asked them to chop the roofline by over 2.5 inches. The outcome was a car that looked perpetually hunched, like it was ducking under a low ceiling. Headroom? Only if you were under 6 feet, or willing to drive with your neck at a 45-degree angle. To Volvo's credit, the interior was plush. Leather seats, wood trim, even a dash of Italian flair. But no amount of luxury could distract from the oddly proportioned body. And yet, somehow, they sold over 6,000 of them. Proof that even questionable ideas can find their audience, especially if they're seated low enough. Oldsmobile Cutlass Aeroback. Somewhere in a GM boardroom in the late 70s, someone must have said, let's give America a taste of European flair. And apparently, that taste came in the form of the Aeroback, a car that looked like it was styled by someone who'd only seen hatchbacks described over the phone. In GM's attempt to go continental, they took the successful Cutlass and Buick Century and gave them a sloping rear that wasn't quite a fastback, definitely not a hatchback, and somehow still managed to look like both were melting. Technically, it had a regular trunk lid, but by the time customers figured that out, most had already turned and walked away. GM was so confident in the Aeroback's appeal that they didn't even bother offering a proper sedan version at launch. That confidence evaporated fast. Sales fizzled, and GM scrambled to push a more conventional design into production by 1980. Oddly, the two-door Aeroback lingered until 1981, like the last guest at a party who doesn't realize the music stopped an hour ago. In the end, the Aeroback became a cautionary tale. When you mix bland ambition with clumsy execution, what you get isn't innovation, it's just awkward. And that, in a nutshell, is how the 80s styling slump began. British Leyland Princess. How bad does a car have to be before even its parent company doesn't want to put its name on it? Enter the British Leyland Princess, a vehicle so unloved it had to become its own brand just to avoid embarrassing the others. Initially launched under Austin, Morris, and Wolseley, the Princess eventually stood alone, not because it earned the spotlight, but because everyone else quietly backed away. Its wedge-shaped body looked like it was styled with a ruler and a grudge. At first glance, you'd think it was a hatchback, but no. This was a sedan in disguise, hiding a laughably small trunk opening that made loading groceries feel like a game of Tetris on hard mode. Combine that with its awkward proportions and questionable reliability, and you had a car that failed at form, function, and common sense. To make matters worse, the Princess rolled onto the scene right as British Leyland was crumbling from within. Mechanical issues, poor build quality, and union troubles created the perfect storm, and the Princess was caught in the middle. In the end, the car's name might have suggested grace or elegance, but let's be honest, the only royal thing about it was the mess it left behind. A AMC Gremlin. Few cars have ever looked quite as unfinished as the AMC Gremlin, and that seemed to be the point. Introduced in 1970, it appeared as though AMC designers started with a normal compact, then simply ran out of paper halfway through the rear end. The result? A car that looked like someone had sliced it with a giant paper cutter, then shrugged and sent it to production anyway. And yet, beneath its awkward, chopped-off silhouette was a strangely brilliant idea. The Gremlin was affordable, practical, in its own lopsided way, and cheap to manufacture. AMC beat the Big Three to the punch in the subcompact race, offering it at a price nearly one-third less than its rivals. That alone made it a hit. By AMC standards, even a phenomenon. Of course, being a sales success doesn't mean being easy on the eyes. The Gremlin's proportions were borderline comedic, with a long hood, short wheelbase, and a back end that looked like it left the factory mid-transformation. Word has it, AMC rejected an even uglier design before settling on this one, though considering who made that call, we'd take that claim with a grain of irony. Still, the Gremlin was unapologetically weird, and in the 70s, that was a superpower. If this video brought back memories to you, stick around until the end, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support our channel. Porsche 914. Not every Porsche looks like it's about to grace the cover of a magazine, and the 914 made sure of that. Released in the early 70s, it was the kind of sports car that turned heads, though not always for the right reasons. From certain angles, it looked less like a product of Stuttgart and more like a high school shop class project that got surprisingly far. To its credit, the 914 was a bold experiment, a mid-engine layout in a compact, affordable package, but styling-wise, it walked a strange line between European minimalist and unfinished prototype. The greenhouse was pulled back awkwardly. The bodywork looked like it had been trimmed with a T-square, and the space between the rear wheels and B-pillars stretched on like a design afterthought. There was no mistaking it for a 911, or anything else, really. It didn't try to be sleek or sensual. Instead, it leaned into its angular awkwardness like a dorky kid at prom who decided to dance anyway. And somehow, that gave it charm. We'll admit it, the 914 isn't a car you dream about as a kid, but years later, you might catch yourself smiling when you see one. It's weird, it's honest, and oddly enough, it works. Saab Sonett III. Did someone forget to tell Saab that balance is kind of important in car design? Because when the Sonett III rolled into the early 70s, it looked like two completely different cars had been welded together during a lunch break. Built with the American market in mind, the Sonett tried to appeal to U.S. tastes, but ended up misreading the assignment in the most spectacular way. Let's start with the nose. It was long, really long, like the automotive equivalent of someone leaning way too far into a conversation. That giant overhang, exaggerated even further by a clunky 5MPU safety bumper, gave the front end a droopy, drooling look. Then there was the rear, short, stubby, and abruptly chopped off, like it left the factory before the designers could finish it. This front-heavy, rear-starved layout threw the whole car's visual balance out the window, and while the Sonnett's sporty intentions were genuine, the styling made it hard to take seriously, especially in a market packed with sharper, more cohesive designs. It wouldn't be until the Saab 900 arrived later in the decade that American buyers finally started giving the brand a second look. By then, the Sonett had already driven off into the land of automotive oddities. Reliant Robin. This wasn't just a car, it was a cry for help on wheels. The Reliant Robin, Britain's most infamous three-wheeler, looked like what happens when someone tries to build a car using only memory, cardboard, and a prayer. While three-wheeled vehicles can, in theory, be quirky and even charming, the Robin leaned fully into its awkwardness, and then doubled down with a wobbly stance and a blank, bug-eyed stare. It wasn't just the looks, though those didn't help. The Robin's narrow front end and high roofline made it resemble a wind-up toy blown up to adult scale. Its predecessor, the Reliant Regal, at least had a faint whisper of dignity in its lines. But the Robin felt like it knew it wasn't a real car, and had simply decided to own it. Built for buyers on a tight budget and a loophole in British licensing laws, the Robin technically offered motoring freedom. What it offered in practice was the terrifying sensation of tipping over during a sharp turn and the social status of a shopping cart with a VIN. Still, there's something oddly lovable about how hard it tries. It's not pretty, it's not practical, but in its own clumsy three-legged way, it's unforgettable. Leyland P76. Can bad design be exported like a cultural artifact? Apparently so, because when British Leyland brought the P76 to Australia, it didn't just ship a car, it delivered a rolling case study in how not to build one. This full-sized sedan was supposed to be Leyland Australia's bold entry into the local market, but it ended up feeling more like a prank that got out of hand. Visually, the P76 was all sharp angles and strange proportions, like someone tried to draw a wedge using only guesswork and resentment. Sure, it had a party trick. The trunk could reportedly fit a 44-gallon oil drum. Useful, perhaps, if you were smuggling a barbecue pit. But that spacious cargo area couldn't distract from the slapdash assembly and flimsy build quality, hallmarks of Leyland's declining empire. Under the hood, there were some interesting powertrain choices, but the appeal ended there. Squeaks, rattles, and electrical gremlins turned everyday driving into an exercise in lowered expectations. In just 2 years, the P76 flamed out after barely 18,000 units. It wasn't just ugly, it was a symbol of a brand unraveling at the seams. If the goal was to unify the Commonwealth through shared automotive disappointment, well, mission accomplished. Which 70s car do you think should have made this list but didn't? Let us know in the comment. Subaru GL Coupe. Style can be a risky experiment, especially when your background is all lab coats and calculators. In the early 70s, Subaru had carved out a reputation in the US for building dependable, no-frills compacts. They weren't flashy, but they got the job done, like the automotive equivalent of a rice cooker. But then someone at Subaru must have looked over at a Datsun brochure and said, "We can be cool too." The result? The Subaru GL Coupe. This was Subaru's attempt at styling, but the proportions ended up looking more like an accident than a design statement. The front was oddly upright, the body seemed stretched in strange places, and then, suddenly, it just ended. The rear overhang was so short, you'd think they ran out of metal halfway through and just slapped on a bumper to call it done. To make matters worse, the taillights looked like leftover parts from a vending machine. From the side, the GL resembled a car that had been compressed lengthwise during shipping and never fully bounced back. Sure, it was practical, affordable, and reliable. But in trying to be stylish, it lost the very charm that made early Subarus lovable and gained a design that looked like it had been faxed in blurry. Sebring-Vanguard CitiCar. Can a car be both ahead of its time and completely ridiculous? Meet the CitiCar, a bold attempt at electric mobility in the 1970s that somehow managed to feel futuristic and laughable at the same time. Built by Sebring-Vanguard, a name that sounds more like a yacht club than a car company, the CitiCar looked like something you'd see patrolling a warehouse floor, not merging onto a freeway. Its wedge-shaped body seemed designed with a protractor and a budget of maybe $40. Under the hood, well, technically under the seat, you got a 2.5 horsepower electric motor, later upgraded to a thundering 6. Top speed? A heart-racing 28 miles per hour, assuming you had a tailwind and no dignity to lose. Range was limited, the interior was Spartan, and safety features were mostly theoretical. Yet despite all that, someone thought it was a good idea to extend the bumpers and rebrand it as the Commuter car, because apparently the only thing missing was a bit more awkward. And still, you can't help but admire its ambition. The CitiCar didn't just challenge convention, it bulldozed right past it in the slow lane. In a strange way, it paved the path for the EVs we know today by showing everyone exactly what not to do first. Vanden Plas, 1500. Luxury isn't always about what's under the hood. Sometimes it's just about distracting you from it. That was the philosophy behind the Vanden Plas 1500, British Leyland's attempt to disguise the deeply mediocre Austin Allegro in a tailored suit. They didn't improve the engineering, the handling, or the reliability. Instead, they added leather, walnut trim, and a grille so upright and regal it looked like it was auditioning for a Bentley. Inside, the car played its part convincingly. Plush carpet underfoot, soft leather seats, and even little fold-down picnic tables in the back, because nothing says refinement like enjoying cold sandwiches while waiting for a tow truck. It was a clever illusion. Take a car nobody wanted and sell it to someone who wanted to feel like they had taste. But beneath the veneer, it was still the same awkward, underpowered Allegro. It rattled, it groaned, and it cornered like a filing cabinet on roller skates. The fancy nameplate didn't change the fact that it was badge engineering at its most shameless. In the end, the Vanden Plas 1500 was less a luxury experience and more a case study in automotive overcompensation. A Jaguar for those with champagne dreams and lukewarm tea budgets. Ford Mustang II. Some cars try to be everything at once and end up being nothing at all. That was the unfortunate fate of the Mustang II Ghia, Ford's attempt to dress muscle in a tuxedo and hope no one noticed it skipped leg day. After downsizing the iconic Mustang in the mid-70s, Ford figured they could win over the luxury crowd by slapping on a padded vinyl roof, opera windows, and color-matched bumpers. The result? A coupe that looked less like a pony car and more like something your aunt might drive to bridge night. Visually, the Ghia trim felt like a collage of every odd styling cue from the era. The faux formal roofline gave it the presence of a shrunken Lincoln, while the wheel covers, borrowed from the Granada, no less, made it clear that even the parts bin was uninspired. It didn't look fast, it didn't look sleek, and it certainly didn't look proud to wear the Mustang name. And yet, the Mustang II sold surprisingly well. But let's be honest, that success probably had more to do with timing, fuel prices, and badge loyalty than with any real admiration for the Ghia's styling choices. Call it a Mustang if you must, but don't expect it to gallop. Ford Pinto. What's the price of shaving a few bucks off a fuel tank design? Enter the Ford Pinto, America's answer to rising gas prices and import competition, packaged in a tidy little car that came with one explosive flaw. On paper, the Pinto was what drivers wanted: affordable, lightweight, and easy on gas. But behind the cheerful marketing was a dangerously compact design that placed the gas tank inches from the rear bumper, as if Ford was daring fate to rear-end it. The real scandal wasn't just the engineering oversight. It was the internal memo that coldly calculated lawsuits to be cheaper than fixing the problem. The Pinto didn't just burn rubber, it literally burned. In crashes, it was known to erupt into flames with all the warning of a birthday candle. Design-wise, it was a plain Jane Econobox with no visual thrills, just an egg-shaped body, basic trim, and a face that screamed entry-level. But it wasn't the styling that made the Pinto unforgettable. It was the lawsuits, the headlines, and the public outrage that followed. Eventually, Ford issued a recall. But by then, the Pinto's legacy was set in stone, as a cautionary tale taught in ethics classes and courtrooms alike. It wasn't the ugliest car of the 70s, but it might have been the most infamous. Car makers are always chasing the next big idea, but sometimes those ideas get weird. From levitating gear knobs to built-in ice makers and horse heads on the hood, some inventions leave us wondering, what were they thinking? Buckle up as we dive into the strangest, quirkiest, and most head-scratching features ever installed in cars. Chevy swivel seat. Chevrolet has always been willing to experiment with comfort and innovation, and the swivel seat was one of their boldest and perhaps quirkiest ideas. First popping up in the late 1950s and making brief reappearances through the decades, this feature allowed car seats to smoothly pivot outward, facing directly towards the open door. But that wasn't all. They could rotate a full 360 degrees, turning completely around inside the car. Imagine spinning around in your seat, chatting comfortably with friends, or easily hopping in and out without awkwardly twisting your body. At first glance, the swivel seat made a lot of sense. For elderly passengers or anyone with limited mobility, it simplified the often cumbersome process of entering and exiting a car. It was also a thoughtful touch for women wearing dresses or skirts, eliminating the discomfort of awkwardly sliding across traditional car seats. On family road trips, passengers could easily rotate their seats to talk face-to-face, creating a cozy living room vibe right inside the vehicle. But despite these promising benefits, the swivel seats never fully caught on. Why? Well, practicality became an issue. Turning fully around while the vehicle was moving raised obvious safety concerns. Seatbelt positioning became tricky, and passengers spinning around freely inside a moving car posed potential dangers. Automakers also discovered that the mechanical complexity added cost and extra maintenance issues, which consumers weren't eager to accept. Ford Wrist Twist Steering System. In 1965, Ford decided to think way outside the box, or rather, outside the steering wheel. Determined to shake things up, they reached beyond the usual automotive experts, bringing in an aerospace engineer to design something radically different. The result? The now infamous wrist twist steering system, proudly showcased on the Mercury Park Lane. This wasn't just another subtle tweak, it was a full-on reimagining of how drivers interacted with their cars. Instead of a conventional round steering wheel, the wrist twist featured two small 5-inch rings positioned where your hands naturally rested. Imagine gripping two small loops, one for each wrist, instead of grasping a familiar wheel. It allowed the driver to steer using either the left or right wrist independently, or both together. Essentially, turning your car became more like operating a futuristic spacecraft than maneuvering an ordinary family sedan. Yet, while this novel concept might sound fascinating today, reactions at the time were decidedly mixed. Drivers were comfortable with the familiar round steering wheel, something intuitive that didn't require special training or practice. Adapting to the wrist twist demanded patience and coordination, making everyday driving suddenly complicated. Most people found it strange, impractical, and frankly, unnecessary. Ford quickly learned that even innovative ideas could become inconveniences if they disrupted simplicity and ease of use. Consumers weren't ready to trade comfort and familiarity for novelty alone. Not surprisingly, the wrist twist faded away, quickly, remembered as just another quirky experiment in automotive history, proof that sometimes the classic design remains the best. After all, why reinvent the wheel when it already turns just fine? Have you ever owned a car with a weird or unusual feature? Tell us your story. Rolls-Royce Door Umbrella. In 2013, Rolls-Royce proved once again why they're synonymous with luxury and meticulous attention to detail. Their innovation wasn't about horsepower or advanced electronics. It was something as simple yet inelegant as an umbrella. But of course, this was no ordinary umbrella. Rolls-Royce embedded this upscale accessory neatly into the car's door, ensuring you're always prepared for an unexpected shower. Now imagine stepping out from your prestigious Rolls-Royce into an unexpected downpour. Instead of fumbling around for an umbrella or getting soaked while your chauffeur races to fetch one, you calmly open the door, press a discreet button, and gracefully retrieve your Rolls-Royce branded umbrella. Not only does this keep you dry, but it also sends a subtle signal of sophistication to those watching nearby. What truly makes this feature remarkable isn't just that the umbrella fits conveniently inside the door. Rolls-Royce went a step further. Once you're back in the car, just slip it into its dedicated holder. This holder isn't merely a convenient storage compartment. It's designed to circulate warm air through the umbrella fabric, drying it thoroughly within minutes. That way, you'll never have to worry about mold, unpleasant odors, or dealing with a dripping umbrella at your destination. Of course, such convenience and luxury don't come cheap. This elegantly simple feature can cost around $1,000, a hefty price tag indeed, but quite fitting for Rolls-Royce's elite clientele. It might seem extravagant to some, but for those who can afford it, the door umbrella embodies the timeless Rolls-Royce spirit, refined, thoughtful, and effortlessly classy. Nissan S Cargo Speed Limit Chime. If you've never driven in Japan, chances are you've missed out on one of the most peculiar and downright frustrating automotive features ever created. Back in the late 1980s, Nissan introduced a quirky little van named the S Cargo, cleverly named to resemble the French word escargot, or snail. Unfortunately, the van lived up to its slow-moving namesake in more ways than one. One of the strangest things Nissan included in the S Cargo was a speed limit warning chime. Now, a speed reminder might sound helpful at first, gently alerting you when you're approaching the legal limit. But this wasn't your gentle reminder. It was more like a relentless, ear-splitting alarm. Once you hit the predetermined speed, this shrill chime would kick in, ringing endlessly until you stopped your car entirely. Yes, you heard right. Simply slowing down wouldn't silence it. Imagine trying to calmly navigate busy streets or highways while enduring constant ringing that didn't quit until you physically turned off the engine. It drove drivers crazy, to put it mildly. As if that wasn't enough, the Nissan S Cargo had a few other irritating quirks too. Every single time you closed the door, the side mirrors shifted out of alignment, forcing you to adjust them repeatedly. And of course, the radio had a reputation for malfunctioning frequently, adding yet another reason for frustration. If you could invent a totally wacky car feature, what would it be? Let your imagination run wild. Reliant Robin three-wheeler. When it comes to oddball cars in automotive history, few are as instantly recognizable, or as delightfully strange, as the Reliant Robin. First introduced in 1973, this quirky little British car turned heads for one major reason: it had only 3 wheels. With 2 wheels in the back and just 1 in the front, the Reliant Robin looked like a car trying to imitate a tricycle, and that's exactly what made it stand out. In the UK, the Robin was more than just a novelty. It was actually a hit with budget-conscious drivers. Why? It promised to save money in all sorts of ways. With fewer parts, it was cheaper to manufacture and maintain. Fuel efficiency was impressive thanks to its lightweight fiberglass body and tiny engine, making it ideal for the fuel-conscious climate of the 70s. Even the insurance rates were a bonus. Because of its 3-wheel setup, the Robin was technically classified more like a motorcycle, which meant lower premiums for many owners. But it wasn't all rosy. The unique wheel configuration, with just 1 wheel up front doing all the steering, made the car notoriously unstable, especially around corners. Drivers had to be careful not to tip the vehicle, which earned it a bit of an infamous reputation in pop culture. American automakers took notice, but ultimately decided it wasn't worth the risk. The Robin's design never made it across the pond in any serious way. Automatic seat belts. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, car companies tried something unusual to encourage drivers to buckle up: automatic seat belts. On paper, this innovation seemed brilliant, a technological solution to the growing enforcement of new seatbelt laws. Remember, in those days, wearing a seatbelt wasn't yet second nature. Many drivers resisted, viewing these laws as intrusive. Automakers thought automatic seatbelts would solve the problem, but in reality, things didn't go so smoothly. Unlike today's integrated seatbelts, these automatic systems typically featured only the shoulder strap, mechanically controlled by a motorized track connected to your car's door. You'd get into your car, close the door, and the seatbelt would slowly glide along a track toward the rear, snugly crossing your chest. Open the door, and it would reverse, sliding forward again to release you. But here's where things got tricky. Drivers often skipped the critical second step, fastening the manual lap belt. They figured the shoulder strap was enough, leaving themselves vulnerable to injury and accidents. Even worse, imagine dropping your keys or wallet just outside your door. Instinctively, you'd pop the door open to reach for them, triggering the motorized belt. Suddenly, you found yourself awkwardly pinned or yanked toward the dashboard or steering wheel, an annoyance at best, and a safety hazard at worst. Over time, mechanical failures also plagued these automatic belts. Motors wore out, leaving the belt stuck midway or completely jammed. A belt trapped forward was useless, while one stuck in the rear position still required drivers to use the manual lap belt, a hassle many simply ignored. Eventually, drivers and manufacturers alike realized that simpler, more dependable seat belts worked better. Water balloon bumpers. In the wild world of 1960s automotive experimentation, few features were as odd and oddly practical as water balloon bumpers. Yes, you heard that right. Some cars were actually equipped with inflatable rubber bumpers filled with liquid, designed to absorb the shock of low-speed impacts. It sounds like a kid's summer prank, but this was a real safety feature tested on the busy streets of New York, San Francisco, and Portland. The idea behind these so-called water balloon bumpers was actually pretty clever. During low-impact fender benders, like a light tap in traffic or a gentle scrape while parking, these fluid-filled bumpers would cushion the blow. Instead of metal crunching or paint chipping, the bumper would simply compress and, in some cases, burst. While that may sound messy, it meant the car's body remained mostly untouched, saving drivers from bigger repairs. And they did work, at least for the types of accidents they were designed for. Taxis, which faced constant stop-and-go traffic and frequent minor collisions, benefited the most. But there was a catch. Once these bumpers burst, they weren't cheap to replace. At the time, getting one repaired could cost up to $1,100, a serious expense, especially in the 60s. That price tag made people wonder if the novelty was really worth the payoff. For most drivers, the idea of paying that much for what essentially looked like a glorified water balloon didn't hold water. Still, it remains one of the more inventive and entertaining solutions from a time when car makers weren't afraid to try the unusual. Honestly, if I were a kid back then, I probably would have offered to tie on real water balloons for half the price and had a blast doing it. Jaguar Land Rover, levitating gear knob. When it comes to futuristic car features, Jaguar Land Rover truly outdid themselves with their mesmerizing levitating gear knob. Yes, you heard that correctly, a gear knob that actually levitates. Introduced to captivate drivers and passengers alike, this unique feature feels more like something from a science fiction movie than from a standard luxury car. Imagine settling into your Jaguar, starting up the ignition, and then, with just a wave of your hand, watching as the gear knob gently rises upward from its resting position. It's an impressive trick, almost making you feel like you have Jedi powers. To select your gear, you simply rotate the sleek knob effortlessly to drive, park, or reverse. Users who've experienced it firsthand rave about the knob's smooth, precise feel, its premium craftsmanship, and the satisfying tactile response as it clicks securely into place. But as magical as this levitating gear knob may seem, it does come with a small catch. If your car's battery runs down, that elegant floating motion instantly disappears, taking the illusion of Jedi-like abilities along with it. Without power, your futuristic knob remains firmly locked down, forcing you back into reality and reminding you that perhaps the Force isn't truly strong with you, after all. Honda CR-V shower. Back in 1995, Honda got adventurous and added a rather unexpected feature to its popular CR-V, a built-in shower. Now at first, this might sound like a clever idea. After all, vans and RVs often come with showers, so why not equip a smaller, versatile SUV with one too? Honda imagined people camping, enjoying outdoor sports, or even just washing off their muddy dogs after a hike. The Honda CR-V shower was essentially a small handheld nozzle plugged into the vehicle's 12-volt socket, along with a compact plastic tub to stand in. You'd simply plug it in, and voila, a refreshing rinse after a dusty trail or a muddy adventure. But here's where reality set in. The water was always cold. Imagine standing outside your SUV after a long hike, looking forward to a relaxing shower, only to be blasted by icy water. Unless your CR-V had been roasting in the sun for hours, you'd never enjoy a warm shower. Though, realistically, who enjoys scalding water heated by a hot car? As quirky as this feature was, most people found little use for it. Sure, it sounded practical on paper, but in everyday life, how often did drivers really need an outdoor shower attached to their compact SUV? For most commuters, city drivers, and even casual weekend adventurers, this extra accessory simply sat unused. Eventually, Honda quietly phased out the shower. Yet, the idea hasn't entirely disappeared. Aftermarket companies picked up where Honda left off, offering portable showers with improvements like heated water. Today, the CR-V shower stands out as a charming but ultimately impractical moment in automotive history, one that might make us smile, but probably wouldn't make us miss it. Toyota Van Ice Maker. Back in 1984, Toyota decided to add a feature to their cargo vans that was not just cool, it was ice cold. Literally. Imagine opening your van door and finding, tucked neatly inside, a genuine ice maker about the size of a shoebox. This was Toyota's quirky attempt to appeal to families and outdoor enthusiasts, turning everyday road trips into refreshing adventures. At first glance, an ice maker inside a vehicle sounds pretty practical. Heading to a campground for the weekend? You'd have fresh ice right there, ready to keep your drinks cold or soothe bumps and bruises after outdoor activities. It probably made those soccer moms feel like superheroes, effortlessly reaching for a handful of ice whenever someone sprained an ankle or skinned a knee. On a hot summer day, it was tempting to think about having endless ice cubes just inches away as you cruised down the highway. But this clever feature wasn't quite as popular as Toyota had hoped. For most drivers, making ice while actually driving down the road seemed like overkill. After all, how often did you urgently need ice on a regular commute? Plus, the ice maker took up precious interior space, leaving some drivers annoyed rather than delighted. Maintenance issues also cropped up, turning this cool idea into a chilly headache for some owners. Still, Toyota's ice maker didn't vanish completely. The idea was genuinely useful enough that RV makers quickly picked it up, where it remains a beloved feature today. Chrysler Highway Hi-Fi. Back in the 1950s, long before streaming services or even CDs, people were stuck with AM radio as their only in-car entertainment option. But AM radio had its limits: spotty signals, static-filled broadcasts, and frequent dropouts. Chrysler noticed this problem and, in 1956, introduced something wildly innovative, and maybe just a little ambitious: the Highway Hi-Fi. In simple terms, this was literally a record player built right into your dashboard. At first glance, the idea sounded fantastic. Imagine cruising down the highway, listening to your favorite tunes anytime you wanted. No more hunting for a radio station. You could simply bring along your cherished collection of 45 RPM records and have the perfect soundtrack for every drive. But reality quickly set in. First off, vinyl records weren't exactly made for portability. Drivers quickly learned the frustration of carefully stacking fragile records in their cars, always worrying about scratches and damage. Plus, on hot summer days, the scorching heat inside the car would easily warp or melt records, permanently ruining your favorite singles. However, the most glaring issue with the highway hi-fi was its practicality, or rather, lack thereof. Cars in the 1950s didn't glide smoothly. They bounced, rattled, and jolted along roads. Every pothole or bump made the needle skip, ruining the listening experience and often damaging the records themselves. Instead of enjoying a smooth melody, you ended up with music that jumped around or skipped altogether. Ultimately, Chrysler's innovative highway hi-fi quickly went from exciting novelty to frustrating headache. While it was definitely ahead of its time, the world simply wasn't ready for in-car record players. What's the strangest car feature you've ever seen or heard about that we didn't include? Uriah Smith's horsehead carriage. Back in the late 1800s, when automobiles were just beginning to roll onto the streets, people were still deeply tied to the world of horse-drawn carriages. The transition from horses to horsepower wasn't exactly smooth. Early cars were underpowered, often unreliable, and, most importantly, terrifying to the animals that shared the roads. That's where Uriah Smith stepped in with one of the strangest ideas in automotive history. In 1899, Smith invented what he called the horseless horsey, a bizarre attempt to bridge the gap between the old and the new. His solution? Mount a large, lifelike replica of a horse's head on the front of a motorized carriage. The logic behind it was surprisingly thoughtful for the time. Smith believed that if a live horse saw what looked like another horse trotting along ahead, it wouldn't be as frightened by the unfamiliar machine it was actually seeing. It was kind of like camouflage, automotive style. The concept, though well-intentioned, didn't really take off. The real problem wasn't the look of the car, it was the sound. The unfamiliar clanking, chugging, and occasional backfiring of those early engines were what spooked the animals most, not the absence of a horse figure. A fake head couldn't mask all that mechanical noise. Hit-and-run identifier device. In the early days of automobile travel, things were chaotic on the roads. Traffic laws were still being figured out. Drivers weren't always properly trained, and accidents happened far more frequently than anyone liked. By the 1920s, one alarming trend was on the rise: hit-and-runs. Drivers would collide with pedestrians or other vehicles and speed away before anyone could catch their license plate, let alone identify them. To tackle this growing issue, a lawyer in the 1930s came up with an idea that sounds more like something out of a slapstick movie than a courtroom strategy. He designed a hit-and-run identification device meant to expose the identity of the fleeing driver in dramatic fashion. The concept was simple, but bold. If the car struck a person or object, a mechanism on the bumper would trigger, dropping down a large panel with the vehicle's license number, and in some versions, even the driver's name, displayed in giant, easy-to-read letters. The idea was that witnesses or victims could quickly take note of the fleeing vehicle's details, even if it vanished into the distance. At the time, this seemed like a clever way to deter careless drivers. But as the years rolled on, technology advanced. Today, we have traffic cameras on nearly every corner, dashboard cams in cars, and nearly everyone carries a phone, capable of snapping a photo in seconds. Modern surveillance and communication tools have made such mechanical name-dropping devices completely obsolete. Mercedes-Benz perfume dispenser. If you've ever found yourself hurriedly eating fast food in your luxury car, only to panic about the lingering smell, Mercedes-Benz had your back. Understanding that drivers of their vehicles are often busy professionals, constantly on the move and regularly hosting clients or colleagues, they came up with an elegant solution: the Mercedes-Benz perfume dispenser. This wasn't your everyday air freshener hanging awkwardly from the rearview mirror. Instead, Mercedes took it to another level, designing an integrated fragrance system hidden neatly inside the glove compartment. Their engineers didn't just settle for any ordinary scent. They traveled the globe, working meticulously with professional perfumers to create a fragrance distinctly refined and exclusive to Mercedes-Benz. Here's how it worked. The sleek dispenser quietly connected to the vehicle's climate control system. Whether you're blasting heat on chilly mornings or cooling down with air conditioning during a hot summer day, a simple push of a button gently circulated the subtle, luxurious scent throughout the cabin, effortlessly eliminating any telltale odors of your secret drive-through indulgences. The beauty of this system was subtlety. It wasn't overpowering, just enough fragrance to mask evidence of a rushed lunch or snack on the go. No one riding along would ever suspect you had just indulged in a quick burger and fries. Instead, they'd step into your Mercedes feeling like they'd entered a five-star hotel lobby, fresh and inviting. Oldsmobile Lightning Rods Shifter. Back in the early 1980s, General Motors decided to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the iconic Oldsmobile hearse in an unforgettable way. How did they do it? Well, they introduced something completely wild and truly unique: the Lightning Rods Shifter. Even today, this quirky automotive feature stands out as bizarre, but it was no less peculiar back when it first appeared. Imagine sliding behind the wheel and seeing not one, not two, but three separate gear levers sticking up from your console. That's exactly what greeted drivers brave enough to take on this mechanical oddity. Designed specifically for a 4-speed overdrive automatic transmission, the Lightning Rod system gave drivers a surprising degree of manual control for an automatic car. The first two levers let you handle the shifts manually between first, second, and third gears, allowing a sportier feel when driving. The third lever? Well, that was your gateway to engaging the smooth, fuel-saving overdrive. But here's the catch. This level of complexity didn't exactly thrill drivers who specifically bought automatics for convenience. Most folks getting behind the wheel of an automatic transmission vehicle were looking for simplicity. Turn the key, shift once, and cruise effortlessly down the highway. With the Lightning Rod setup, what was supposed to be easy suddenly felt like a chore. Add to that the hefty price tag General Motors attached to this unusual feature, and it's clear why the Lightning Rods never really caught on. Ultimately, this flashy innovation fizzled out quickly. Subaru brat bolt-in bed seats. Back when safety regulations were a bit looser and fun was sometimes prioritized over practicality, Subaru introduced a quirky feature in their iconic little brat pickup trucks. In an effort to make riding in the open-air bed of a truck safer, or at least slightly less dangerous, they installed something that seems almost unbelievable today: bolt-in bed seats. These weren't your typical plush reclining seats, though. Made entirely of rigid plastic, these unique chairs were designed to allow passengers to comfortably enjoy the ride in the back while watching the world zip by behind them. No more sitting awkwardly on cold metal or holding on for dear life. Subaru offered a designated place to sit, bringing a touch of comfort to an otherwise bumpy experience. Now, you might wonder how Subaru ensured passenger safety with these bed seats. Well, here's the thing. They didn't exactly rely on seat belts or harnesses. Instead, each seat came equipped with specially designed ski pole-like grips. Passengers were encouraged, well, practically required, to hold tightly onto these handles as the brat zoomed around corners or cruised down highways. While this concept might make safety regulators shudder today, at the time, it perfectly captured Subaru's spirit of adventure and youthful enthusiasm. These quirky bed seats turned even mundane trips into mini-adventures, letting passengers feel like they were part of something special. Eventually, stricter safety regulations made features like these vanish from the roads, but the Subaru Brat's bolt-in bed seats live on fondly in the memories of those who once bravely grabbed hold of those handles, feeling the wind in their hair as they cruised in style. Thanks for riding with us through the weird and wonderfully awful world of 1970s car design. Whether you laughed, cringed, or both, there's plenty more where that came from. Got a 70s eyesore we forgot? Drop it in the comments. And as always, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you won't miss what's next.